It was the Geneva Motor Show this week with electrification, autonomous cars and the global trade tensions, key themes for the auto sector. And with me now to discuss is Tim Pollard from Car Magazine, who joins us from Peterborough. Tim, you've been in Geneva this week. One quick question before we kind of get into the show. Why were there so many automakers that were notably absent from the show this year?
Well, I think it's very plain to see that motor shows have a changing role in the industry. We had players, big players like Ford, Volvo weren't there, Jaguar, Land Rover, two really big companies who normally would, jump at the chance to do a Geneva Motor Show, not turning up. This is one of the world's biggest sort of industrial expos. It's not a cheap thing to attend. We're looking at, well into seven figures for the big stands, really. So at a time when JLR, for instance, are chopping 4,000 or 5,000 jobs in the UK, it's hard to justify spending that amount of money when they might not have a message or a new car to roll out at the show.
Gotcha. So what have been some of the exciting big reveals at the Motor Show this year?
Well, I think this week's Geneva Motor Show, and it goes on into next week as well, it's been a really good one. I've been going every year for about 20 years. And this year, rather than just the odd firework here or there was really a real breadth to what was going on. There was, as usual in Geneva, an awful lot of top-end supercars. The world's most expensive new car was shown by Bugatti, new Ferrari, new Lamborghini. Virtually wherever you look, there was top-end supercars. But then equally, there were some really relevant real-world cars. Peugeot showed a new 208 small car, which was looking really good. Renault rolled out the new Clio, so very viable every man, every woman cars. And then also there's another trend, really very plain to see, electrification. You've already mentioned it. The whole industry is being turned inside out by this rush to go electric. But you really saw us at this show, there was a real sense that it was kind of tangible. I mean, we've been seeing electric cars for years, but now within touching distance. Real proper range, real affordable prices. So
do you think the focus going forward is likely to be on full electric cars or more towards hybrids for now?
Well, the direction of travel is clear. Electrification is here to stay. It's going to be a huge paradigm shift. I think you can see the hybrids, the plug-in hybrids, almost as stepping stones towards full electrification. You only need to look around, typical British sort of high street or residential street and see that actually an awful lot of people probably can't go electric yet. They might not have the infrastructure at home if you live in a flat, or indeed on long journeys if you're driving high mileages every year. And the cost, while coming down, they are still expensive cars. So we're on a journey. I think it's going to take, even halfway through next decade. Most car manufacturers are predicting, something like a quarter of their sales will be fully electric. Now, a lot of the rest of it, the other 75%, will be electrified. That often tends to mean hybridisation. Crucially, that means that 3/4 of cars on sale or new cars being sold halfway through next decade will still have a combustion engine in. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's really not.
Gotcha. So this is a real long-term trend to pay attention to. So in talking of other long-term trends, what's the sense on the ground about the future of fully autonomous vehicles?
Well, these have been around for a long time. I mean, I was driven in a fully autonomous car, hands-off, around a test track at quite high speed back in 2013. This technology is not that new. The technology is improving, as you might imagine. If you look at our smartphones or computers and what's happened in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years since that time, clearly the technology is getting better. But I think there's the kind of society and kind of legal pressures, kind of holding this back. Now, if you're in the middle of somewhere like central London, very clearly defined areas, I could imagine autonomous cars happening in 5 or so years. Up here in Cambridgeshire, in rural England, we are decades away probably from this being an economic reality. These cars require very carefully controlled zones, proper road markings. I mean, the roads around here have very few white lines left. So it's going to be a very long time, I think, until we see this really take off. I think a bit like electrification, this is a long-term thing. We're going to see little sort of nudges and step forwards. If you look at the typical modern, even quite the mainstream cars, sort of BMWs, Mercedes, they've actually, they used to have cruise control, then they have added a little bit of lane assist, and now they've got radar cruise control, and they keep a distance to the car in front. We're seeing these little steps towards full autonomy happening now. I think we'll continue to see that. Full off, actual hands-off, car driving, you reading a book, that is really a very long way away, I think.
So when you were at the motor show, how much talk was there about Brexit, and what's the sense you're getting from the industry?
Well, I mean, you would have seen the headlines that emerged on Tuesday, which was the International Media Day at the Geneva Motor Show. Brexit wasn't far away from an awful lot of lips. It really wasn't. We've already obviously seen the Honda announcement about Swindon just a couple of weeks ago. There were then sort of very unfortunate, very stark warnings from senior board members at BMW, talking about the future of Plant Oxford. Now, this is typical. You always see rhetoric ramping up. We are in the closing stages of the Brexit agreement, if there is to be one. And I think, you're seeing some of the big players come out and say, hang on, guys, we really, we're a major employer here, one of the biggest factories in the UK, we need something to happen. So, we saw it at Mini, so BMW, the owners there. We saw Toyota come out and make a statement as well. There's talk of Nissan in Sunderland, that's the UK's biggest car factory, having to cut back on the shifts. I mean, really, this is an industry that is really going to be affected very badly if there's a disorderly clatter out of the EU, I think.
And what about the global trade war? What's the feeling on the ground there about the impact on the auto sector?
I think, Brexit is one aspect of that. I mean, clearly we see China, the US. It's just a kind of a reminder, really, that this is a very interconnected industry. It's one which has, been quite open and sort of collaborative for the last sort of couple of decades. A lot of the car makers, in particular in China, have been getting into bed, helping with joining forces with Chinese car makers. That's been, the policy. But I think we are clearly entering a new era where there are complexities. There's more sort of nationalistic forces at play. President Trump in America clearly is playing, sort of a long game of what he's trying to do. It's a very difficult time to be a car maker. The pressures we mentioned here, having to suddenly switch propulsion from fossil fuels to electrification, that's a very expensive thing. Having to develop autonomous cars, and we haven't even started talking about the sharing of cars and the sort of the ownership models which will change, the car clubs and what have you. And then you've got to get to all of that, the sort of the fiscal and economic realities of things like trade wars, like Brexit. It's a definitely hard time right now, I think. There's going to be a lot of change, I think. There'll maybe even be some, casualties along the way, but there's some big change afoot.
All right, so if you could walk away with one car from the motor show, what would it be?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot now. I'd love to say I would be able to have a little sort of garage of cars, but there was one very small... There was a very small stand where men and women of a particular age who are into cars would look back, and there was a remade Lancia Stratos, which really caught my eye. It was a wedge-shaped sports car from the 1970s, 80s. And there's a company in Italy that's actually remanufacturing it. So it's a bit like Mini, BMW come along and built a new Mini. This is a sort of coach builders in Italy who are remaking a Lancia Stratos, and I would have been very happy to be driving back over the Alps.
Well, it sounds very, very glamorous indeed. Now, less glamorous is looking ahead. We've obviously got Volkswagen's earnings coming out next week. A lot of investors will be paying close attention to that release. So what is it that we should be watching for from VW's earnings?
Well, I think VW, it's fair to say, is a company absolutely repivoted around electrification. All the fallout from the Dieselgate emissions scandal, which 3-4 years ago now, it has been a very, very difficult time for the company. And the history books will show, I'm sure, that it has used it to try and accelerate the change which is already happening. They have embraced electrification probably more wholeheartedly than any other mainstream car maker anywhere in the world, really. They are one of the world's biggest car makers, and they have thrown the kitchen sink at it. And I think we are, in the next 12 months, we are about to see the first production cars coming along. It's going to be a family of cars called the ID range. That's going to be, and there will be hatchbacks, a bit like a sort of golf-sized car. There will, in fact, be a whole family. And what's going to be interesting to look out for is the speed at which they are rolled out. They have come up with a new technology called MEB, which is a scalable electrical car architecture, which can do small cars, it can do vans, it can do camper vans. We're going to see products like the rather cool microbus for cool VW campers from the past. And we're going to see this fusion of new tech, so electrification, electric car, pure electric, not hybrids, with some very clever top hats on. We'll see some of that, the cool, the Beatles, the campers, etc. I think they are clearly going to pay. They're paying for this right now. It's an awful lot of spend going into the R&D. It's not cheap to do, trying to do this paradigm shift. But they are playing a game that they want to get in there first, roll out cars at scale, and not just VW, but also their Seat, Skoda, Audi brands, and indeed Porsche as well. We're going to see a lot of change very quickly at VW.
Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That was Tim Pollard from Car Magazine filling us in on the Geneva Motor Show. I'm Victoria Scholar, and thanks so much for watching IGTV, and we'll see you very soon.